Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is sort of the other kind of compliance, and this is where your customer comes to you with something they got to do, and then you have to make a decision based on what makes sense for you. So the customer may have a government or a regulatory requirement that they have to do. They may have to file a conflict minerals or human trafficking declaration, right? They may have to do that, and they need your help to get that done. Or they may be publicly traded, and they may have made, they may have activist investors, which is a whole nother layer to this phase. They may have activist investors forcing them to do sustainability reporting also, where it's not a pure money thing, and they may need your help with meeting those sustainability goals one way or another. So we'll talk a little bit about the way those have worked. You guys rolled your eyes earlier when I mentioned conflict minerals reporting. Have you had to do any of these things? Okay, so a few years ago, Congress passed legislation to reform the financial services industry. It was called Dodd-Frank. We all heard of Dodd-Frank, I'm sure. But one of the lesser known things that was jammed into this 2,000-page bill that really didn't have anything to do with financial services reform was a requirement that publicly traded companies had to attest under penalty of perjury. The CEO had to sign under penalty of perjury that they declared that either they did or did not use any mineral in any product that they produce that contains tin, tantalum, tungsten, or gold, and what the source of that material was. So they had to affirmatively say, we have no conflict minerals in anything that we sell. Or they had to say, our material contains conflict minerals. Or they can say, for the first couple of years, they were allowed to say, we can't tell. So they all said, for the first couple of years, we can't tell. Because it's crazy. You know, you think of the Ford Motor Company. How many suppliers does the Ford Motor Company have? It's insane. Think of the number of parts and pieces that goes into making a Ford Taurus, SHO. But, you know, think about that. What goes into that stuff? And then think about when you go and ask that supply chain to attest. So your customer comes to you and says, I need to know if anything you sell me has tantalum, tungsten, tin, or gold in it. And then if it does, was it mined in a part of the Democratic Republic of Congo that is considered a conflict region? Are you serious? Are you kidding me? Well, look, that guy's down in the hole with the AK-47 pointed at him. You know, we got to help him out. Well, yeah, maybe there's a smarter way of doing that. Frankly, by policing the smelters. This stuff comes out of the ground and it goes into a small number of smelters on the continent where they do the metals, right? That's really the choke point for this, and that's where they've had success monitoring this. But there is a great deal of unproductive activity and I would argue, a huge wealth transfer from global corporations to international consulting firms to put together compliance processes for this.
I read it was $700 million annually for U.S.-based companies to comply with that.
That doesn't surprise me at all. And $690 million of it is going to international consulting firms to figure out how to comply with this. So lawyers and accountants are making out like bandits. I don't know how much it's doing for that guy in the hole with the gun pointed at him. I'd like to think it's making his life better, but I think the smelter policing is what's really making that guy's life better. But again, I don't want to sound cynical. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which monitors the stock market, right? They're the ones who have been given responsibility for policing this and for going after people who are not complying with the responsibility of filing these declarations. The administrator of the SEC in 2014 at Duke University said, I don't know why Congress gave us this. We don't do this. We don't know how to do this. This should be, somebody else should be doing this. We have no interest in policing this. She literally came out and said that. It was kind of shocking, actually. They don't have any interest in enforcing this because they don't know how. And they know it's unenforceable. So, you know, at that same time, I was on conference calls with NEMA and National Association of Manufacturers working groups on trying to respond to this, right? And how we're going to work. How do we comply? What's our response? Is there policy alternatives? And one of the largest manufacturers in our industry in the world was on that call, and they said, you know, we're not worried about the SEC. We know they can't, they're not interested in doing this and enforcing this. It's the non-governmental or the NGOs is who they're worried about. You know, this is Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? You're helping the Blood Diamond guys. You know, this is a shaming campaign, is what they're worried about. The possibility of shaming campaigns here. So, how do we help respond? It's a nightmare. And the problem is for the first 2 years, big companies could say, we don't know, we can't determine this. And they could file that with the SEC, and that was acceptable. It's a safe harbor provision. That 2 years is gone, and now they have to complete these things. So it was a little easier the first couple of years. It's just going to get a lot harder from here, because your customers, even smaller ones, are going to need to file these things, and they're going to need to be reasonably accurate. And when I say reasonably accurate, I don't mean to be cynical, but I was on another conference call with one of the NGOs talking about the filings. And all the talk from the NGOs was, yes, we had 97% submitted their reports, or whatever the number was. Huge percentage submitted the reports. Yes, they did an audit process. Yes. And nobody was asking what I thought was the obvious question, so I piped up and said, is anybody characterizing the content of the responses? And there was crickets on the other line, and then finally somebody said, well, we haven't really got that far yet. So $700 million has gotten us a check the box exercise, and nobody really knows if they could be filing a page full of emojis, you know, and they would have got the box checked. It's extraordinary, the money that's being wasted.
These reports, they say, hey, you need to go back. We're a distributor. This is a requirement for manufacturers. Here's their website. So we can't do all that work.
Yeah, and so the question is, there's a variety of responses. It depends on what the customer will take. And I want to talk more about that in a second. But the simple answer, and it's not simple at all, but what most people are doing is they're aggregating the manufacturer's policy statements and sending those. So what we're doing is we have a website we have put together, NAED.org/conflict minerals, where we are asking manufacturers to post links to their compliance documents. So we're trying to get as many of these in one place as possible. So, yeah. Unfortunately, we have 2 links on there at this time. We've been asking the manufacturers to give us the links. We're not charging them anything. They don't have to do anything, but we don't want to just scrape the web and start putting up their policies. That's not our job. It's like, I don't want to put brand X's compliance thing up there and it's not the one they wanted, right? I need them to do it affirmatively, to say, yes, here, post this. So that's the thing. We're just trying to we're in the manufacturers committee meetings. We've done email outreach, trying to get them it's so simple. Just give us a URL. Yes, actually, Mary Shaw from IDEA was on these NEMA conference calls. I think, unfortunately, they got bigger fish to fry right now, but it's the perfect solution is put a field in the IDW that has that PDF of their report, their EICC GESI template or their policy statement. EICC GESI is the de facto standard. EICC GESI is the de facto standard for reporting these things. It was the response of the conflict-free sourcing initiative we referred to earlier. It's industry, the biggest companies in the world that have to file these things, agreeing on an Excel template is essentially what it is. So if we could have a field in the IDW that would have that document embedded in it. GESI. It stands for Electronic Industry Cooperation Council or something like that. GE is a Global E-Sustainability Initiative, GESI. If you Google EICC GESI, EICC GESI, you can get that link, you can get that report. But you don't want to get in that business. It's a nightmare. The way to do this right now is to aggregate those responses. We're trying to give you a shortcut, but we got to get we're actually reaching out to distributors also saying, here, forward this to your suppliers and tell them all they got to do is send us a URL. We'll put it up, but we're not going to put URLs up without there. That's just a recipe for disaster as a trade association. I don't want to put one of my manufacturer members' links up there and they didn't want it there or it's the wrong one. Nobody wins in that situation. So briefly, I just want to think, so that's the obvious one, right? Conflict minerals is the obvious report because we're dealing with it right now. But the reality is the biggest corporations in the world are looking at sustainable supply chains. They're looking at minimizing or eliminating waste along the supply chain, material sourcing, processing, delivery, disposal, how far has this material traveled to get to me, and then how far does it have to travel to get to the end user. All of those things are starting to be looked at. And what do they all have in common? They all have in common supply chain visibility, which I think is a thing that we would probably want anyway. Your customers certainly want it. Your customers have been trained, or starting to have been trained in the consumer purchasing environment, where they can buy something on Amazon and it's there in 2 days, and they can see when, they get a text message when it leaves the dock and when it arrives and who signed for it and all that kind of stuff. So the expectation of our customers is evolving rapidly, so they expect that visibility into where their order is. Now we have things like RFID tagging, maybe the material, just sort of the life cycle of that product, is how it's, from when it gets to our dock is the end, right? But what did it do before that? What were all the material inputs that went into it? What is percent country of origin in it? Does it buy American certified? This kind of question is not going away. In fact, it's going to become more prominent, and it's probably not a bad thing. I mean, it may or may not be a bad thing. It's reality. How can we make money off of it is the question. Southwire is auditing their suppliers for sustainability practices, right? This is something that is not going away. There you see from the Responsible Sourcing Network, prepare for a wave of heightened social reporting requirements. The number of substance regulations, quote unquote, around the world is increasing every year. So this is, again, we're at the beginning of this, if you look where we were just a few years ago. So you're going to need to respond. Philips, in the European Union, is experimenting with a concept of cradle-to-cradle product design. And so when one of their lamps is reached the end of its useful life, it's no longer recycled. It's beyond recycling. They have to recapture all the material in there, and they want zero waste from it. All of it needs to go into the input, needs to go into a new product somehow. So again, these guys are, there's no end to what these folks are going to try to engineer, and it's going to touch us. So the question you have to ask yourself when you think about your response is, what's it cost me and is it worth it? Are you a pragmatic business owner who wants to make your customer happy, or do you really believe this stuff and live it? I think most of the members I know are more along the lines of pragmatic supporters, but hey, if you got to do it, why not make some money off of it? Or why not, tell a story, position yourself in the marketplace, right? If you're going to do it anyway. What does a customer really want? Maybe the customer just needs to check a box. In that case, they'll take anything. They'll take a letter. Some customers were taking letters from the distributor saying, we support, safe working conditions for employees around the world. And we will endeavor to do business with suppliers who support this as well. We, as a distributor, are not subject to the requirements of Dodd-Frank, conflict minerals reporting, and are happy to answer any questions. Literally, that's what some people were submitting. And again, nobody was really reading things. They were just, oh yeah, I got this one, checking a box, and then moving on with their lives. That's going to be harder to do in the future, right? But what does the customer want? And does the customer have a standardized solution, or are they customized? Most cases, the customer will accept an EICC JESI template from your manufacturer or some sort of disclosure statement from the manufacturer if you aggregate those. Some cases, somebody got sold something by one of these global consulting firms and has some web portal where you got to go in there and fill out their form on the web portal, and it's not as easy, right? So these things go into your decision-making process. All things being equal, is that customer going to make a sourcing decision based on this report? Well, then you got to jump, right? Otherwise, if nobody else is in a better position in the marketplace to fulfill that requirement with the same material at the same price, the same availability, and the same product application knowledge that you guys have, then you're in pretty good shape and you can afford to tell them, I don't do this. It's just on a case-by-case basis. You have to take into consideration what does the customer expect, what is the customer's alternative, and that's how you decide how to respond.